In this research review, we're going to take a look at an interesting study, meta-analysis, that looked at 61 studies looking at anecdotes versus statistical information and their ability to help persuade people and what people seem to pay attention to most when in a given circumstance. This came up off of some of the discussion of science versus misinformation, a lot of things that are going on. We're not going to go down that avenue to cover it, but really think you can look at this in two ways. One, if you're a provider or someone who is working with people, how you can use anecdotes versus statistical information to help communicate important things, to help guide people to the information you want them to have. And then also for the consumer, if you may be paying attention to anecdotes when the statistical information might be important, or vice versa, depending on it. And what they really were looking at in this meta-analysis is just how we respond to those different things and in what situations. And so being aware of that can be really helpful in making sure that you are making the right decision based on the information that makes the most sense to make that decision. So, really what they were looking at in this meta-analysis, which I mentioned was 61 studies, they broke down a few other reviews that happened before, and we'll talk about those as well, because the information kind of goes back and forth on which one is more persuasive in a given situation, but they sum it up nicely at the end. But really what they were focusing on is, do hard facts always work to be the most convincing? That can be a really important thing to take a look at, that even when the evidence is there about a specific type of training program or diet, or the evidence is not there, is it always enough to convince people that that is the way to go? Other question they were kind of looking to answer is, why do stories seem to hold more weight in certain situations? If you found yourself as the power of somebody's story of getting healthy and fit, even if it's a very different way of going about it, seem to hold more of your attention and be more convincing than statistics showing things another way. And in the world of memes and tweets and one-liners, this can be something that is really important. So just a couple quick definitions. Statistics are empirically quantifiable about whatever they are talking about. In theory, that is the data, the hard data about what is going on, versus anecdotes, which can be narratives, personal anecdotes, case histories, stories, and testimonials. So all the things that we tend to see around some commercials, especially when it comes to health and fitness. So in this review, they looked at that stats do show to have a greater persuasive impact than anecdotal evidence on beliefs and attitudes, while the reverse is found for intentions. So if you are going to act on something, anecdotes can be something that are really important for you to hear and maybe more persuasive, which it seems like that would be almost counterintuitive or counterproductive, contradictory, if you will, that if you're going to be able to build your beliefs and attitudes on statistics, yet anecdotes seem to have more power when you actually are working on making that intentional action. Both have a role. It's just how do you personally process it, or how do you personally kind of pitch that to people in terms of your marketing or whatever you're looking at. So ultimately, what this meta-analysis found, that in situations where emotional engagement is high, and they use the examples of severe threat, health-related issue, or something that's directly affecting oneself, statistical evidence is less influential than anecdotal evidence. When emotional engagement is relatively low, so a non-healthcare related thing, a non-emergency, or if it's not directly affecting you, statistical evidence is more persuasive than anecdotal evidence. And so really that shows that the tendency is to prefer individual or the inside view rather than a statistical or outside view when emotions are high. So relating that all back to health and fitness is, do those anecdotes and testimonials when they really are trying to connect with a person on getting there, make more of an impact because they make it highly emotional. They put it around a health issue. They put it around pain, which again can be a really emotional aspect for a lot of people. Fitness, being able to go and do things where now the marketing has made that emotional to help use those anecdotes to persuade you a certain way. Again, I think that can be used for good, but it can also be used to persuade, to sell you something that you may or may not need through a route that allows you to get there. And I think we see that a lot in the influencer world, where not everything that they're selling is with the best intentions. It is to make a buck, and yes, it could have helped them, but there is no panacea that has been come up with yet for anything related to health, diet, nutrition, fitness, or else we would all be going that route. So I think those are things that need to be taken into account when you are the consumer watching those things, and making sure that you're remaining open to the statistical evidence about what that may do, while also being aware that that anecdote may be impacting you. And that's not necessarily wrong or a bad thing, but it is just something to be aware of. For some providers out there, if you are providing a service that isn't necessarily just selling the next shake or pill or potion, anecdotes can be really powerful to help back up your statistical information if you are focusing on making an emotionally charged connection with the person you are trying to sell to. And so that's ultimately where these people that did this meta-analysis wrapped it up, is that stats can be persuasive when it comes to working with people that are policymakers. You want to present those statistical numbers because they generally seem to try and take as much emotion out of it as possible. They do that on purpose to make sure that they are trying to get to the data. That doesn't mean it's a all the time thing, but that is something that will happen. Whereas anecdotal evidence may be more persuasive for people on the individual direct impact level. And the example they used was seatbelts. Presenting statistical safety of seatbelts to policymakers can help get legislation and things passed for seatbelt laws, whereas anecdotal evidence or stories or things may be more persuasive to parents to get their children to wear seatbelts. So that was the example that they used on when you can utilize both options to really benefit. And so in the marketing world, anecdotal appeal should be striving to drive intense emotion, whereas if you're going to utilize stats, try and downplay the severity or the consequences and reduce emotion. And so you can take that and kind of think how that would work in your own marketing, trying to appeal to people, and when emotion would be best served to use versus statistics. And if you are consuming, trying to see what they are trying to say to you and how they are trying to get you to react with emotion, or really by trying to put the stats in front of you and what that will make you respond and feel to what they are trying to sell. So really interesting article. We'll put the source in the show notes or the description so you can see what that is. Something that it's one of those you feel like you may have intuitively known, but kind of hearing it in stats and in research really just made it interesting. So hope you found this interesting and something that you can utilize, and we look forward to talking to you at the next one.